Girl, you and I would die, unbelievers bound to the tracks of the train.
I'm here to introduce a very dear friend of mine and my coach, Matt Thornton. I moved to Portland, Oregon in late 1998, and I've known Matt for, since 98. We didn't become friends until a few years after that. And he's been an inspiration for a lot of my talks. He gave me the idea to talk about authenticity in my TAM talk 2 years ago. He's been an unbelievably, not just a strong supporter, but someone for whom I've come to rely on his counsel and trust him. He really is a plain-spoken, thoughtful, no BS, honest guy. And from my association with him, I've learned a lot. I've been taking Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and doing it for quite some time. I must give the full disclosure that I'm really quite bad at it. It's probably not the best thing to be bad at, but I've been doing it for a long time, and it's taught me a lot of larger life lessons that perhaps Matt can talk about later on. But I want to read Matt's bio. It's a pretty extensive bio. Matt Thornton was part of the early group of Americans to become involved in the Brazilian art of Jiu-Jitsu, having been introduced to it in 1991. He was also the first person in the state of Oregon to receive a black belt in the art. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gained fame with the advent of the sport of mixed martial arts, sometimes you've heard of it, MMA, and the first UFC was the Ultimate Fighting Challenge, which took place on November 12, 1993. As a teacher, he produced a video in 1999 titled simply Aliveness, which became one of the top sellers of all time within the industry. They set off a firestorm of controversy and remained a central catalyst in the martial arts revolution that is still taking place all over the world. They were voted as one of the top 5 self-defense videos of all time by Black Belt magazine. Martial Arts Video Review said, "If you buy one set of videos this year, let this be the ones. If you believe that there has been an evolutionary development in the martial arts over the last few decades, from Bruce Lee to the Gracies, all-around fighters, then you want to see these tapes. You have to sell your body to medical science or your sister to an Arab oil sheik, buy these tapes." It's not my quotation. I see it now on Twitter. It goes, horrible, racist, misogynist geek. Matt's first series still remains a top seller and is sold in over. As a coach, he was awarded 10 of his own Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts. That list includes the famed UFC coach and father of MMA in Ireland, John Kavanagh, a very, very dangerous man. The UK's most successful coach, Carl Tanswell, another dangerous man, and other great teachers, competitors, trainers and champions. Over the decades, Matt has worked with some of the best MMA fighters, grapplers, and combat athletes in the world, including UFC Hall of Famers Randy Couture, Dan Henderson, Forrest Griffin, and others. He's also produced Oregon's first and only so far Mundial's world champion. Quote, "The training with Matt and SBG has been instrumental in my preparation for reality fighting," and that's the key in Matt's talk today, reality. "Matt's expertise in standing and ground-up techniques has helped me win the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Matt has been hired to teach seminars in functional martial arts all across the United States and the world. That list includes Germany, Canada, Singapore, Denmark, the UK, Ireland, Sweden, can't even pronounce these places, Thailand, France, just to name a few. In addition to that, he was the first instructor to bring the art of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and MMA to the nation of Iceland, where he met his wife, Solomon. In 1993, Matt received his blue belt from the legendary Rickson Gracie. He met his main coach, Chris Howder, in that same year. Chris was what was called in the BHD community the Dirty Dozen, the first 12 Americans to learn a black belt in the art. Matt appreciated Chris's conceptual, no-nonsense approach. Chris became a regular guest in Oregon for seminars and training, and Matt's school, SBG, which is straight class, became Oregon's first MMA-style gym. Eventually, spin-offs included Team Quest, Impact Jiu-Jitsu, Nemesis Academy, and more. Chris Howder awarded Matt his purple belt in brown, and then in 2001, I remember when you were a purple belt. One top of running his own academy located in Portland, Oregon for 20 years, acting as head coach for Straight Glass Gym International, an organization with over 40 affiliate gyms in more than 11 countries, coaching top-level athletes and giving aliveness workshops around the world. Matt has been published in multiple martial arts magazines, Black Belt magazine, Inside Kung Fu, Martial Arts Legend, Fighters, Martial Arts Illustrated, the list just goes on. New York Times best-selling author Sam Harris said, Matt Thornton is one of the clearest martial arts instructors I have come across. Matt's main emphasis over the last decade has been addressing superstition as it relates to the field of sports training, combat sports, and martial arts. The methodology known as aliveness was designed as a tool to help people distinguish fact from fiction. Over the last 20 years, his writing has branched off into other areas. He's currently working on a book, and I've read the first chapter of that book, of that manuscript, which will cover the topic of violence and its relationship both to combat sports and skepticism. So Matt's going to show, or we'll show some videos. We'll show some videos pretty soon. I think one of the things to pull from this talk today is that this talk is far more about distinguishing reality from make-believe land in real life than it is in the martial arts. Superstition is just, and fantasy-based or rife in the martial arts, but the tools that Matt will talk about will extend way beyond the domain of the martial arts. So, without further ado, do you want me to put the videos on? I can put it on. Okay, we'll watch some videos of some pretty extreme silliness. I will say if you're squeamish, some of these videos are rather intense, so we'll give you an opportunity to leave. We have one guy who thinks he has mystical powers, and he takes basically what's a machete and he starts hacking at his arm. We have other people who there are so many superstitions in the martial arts, it's hard to know even where to begin. We have another guy who thinks he can knock people out without touching them. We have more people. That's a big one in the martial arts, by the way. Like, well, I use my key like that old Nintendo game, Ayuka, and the guys fall back. No, that is a figment of the imagination. It doesn't happen. All right, so let's check out some videos.
There really appears to be people who think that they actually have these magical abilities. This video is what looks like the production of an Australian documentary looking at a chi master who believes that he can toughen his skin and his tissues against a sword blow so that he could strike his arm with a sharp sword without cutting it. So he goes through all of his maneuvers, he goes through his breathing exercises and his martial arts maneuvers, which actually look quite impressive. He's obviously very skilled physically. And then you could see him circling his arm and trying to bolster its strength. And he has a short sword that he says was especially sharpened for this TV demonstration. And then he hacks his arm with the sword and slices right down to the bone. And the blood appears, starts to drip down. The guy looks like he's in shock, both emotionally and physically in shock. They have to lay him down, they have to staunch the bleeding.
Just to add a little more realism to it, right before he does it, he goes over and cuts a freaking sapling tree down with it. Maybe a tree that was like 3 inches thick. I mean, literally, 3 shots, 3 pieces of wood go flying. This knife is sharp.
That was a real sharp short sword. It really was. Of course, he's, mortified. Everyone on the show looked embarrassed by what happened. And what should we do now? The guy just cut into his arm. But the host tried to save things. He said that this guy really believed that he could do this.
Yep.
I mean, you look at the video, he does. Without hesitation, he slices into his arm, and he's genuinely surprised at the blood that starts gushing out. So he said he believed he could do it, therefore he must really have this power, which was just a really nice, juicy post hoc rationalization.
Actually, I was wondering why it's taking so long to
get it into the spirit into you. Yeah.
I said it's taking too long.
Yeah.
And then I just tried.
Don't worry, it's difficult on camera. It's difficult.
Yeah. I've done this a dozen times, and this is the first time it happened.
Really.
As his blood leaks out, I can't help thinking that Red must have actually believed he could do this. He claims he's done it before.
Pressure points can be dangerous. I've flatlined several people. to have it, you know you have
Dillman teaches these techniques in seminars all over the world, drawing attendees who are especially interested in finding out if his unusual karate techniques are real.
I mean, so many people have studied it and swear by it. I've had to see it for myself, though.
In the beginning, you're kind of like, well, I don't know if this is for real.
It's almost like a UFO sighting. It's like, well, I got to see it to believe it. You know, I hear these people do it, but until I see it, you know, it's one thing to hear, it's one thing to see.
They come to see Dillman's remarkable ability to move walls of people from 10 feet away when they can't even see him, by channeling his chi at them and interrupting their auras.
I locked with their aura, and I moved the line. I shouldn't tell you this, but I play with people in Starbucks, and I just stood there and I moved the line. And they all moved, and they all looked back at me at the same time. They went like this, and I looked back too, like it was happening to me. I looked because I didn't want them to know I did this, right?
But what really draws the audience's attention is Dillman's no-touch knockout, a karate move that could theoretically revolutionize combat as we know it, except that it can take years to learn. Essentially, he claims to be able to knock anyone out without touching any part of their body, by just throwing a giant chi whammy at them.
Sometimes it drains me. I can get that way within a second or two if I throw the chi out too fast. Get back.
After seeing so many demonstrations, so many different techniques, so many different moves, you can't help but start believing.
They're opening up another door in your mind. It's just unbelievable.
I know I have chi energy. You can see it with the half moons. My chi is up now because of the filming.
But is the mysterious energy called chi really what's giving Dillman and his followers such extraordinary powers? In one corner, weighing in at no more than 125 pounds, is chemist Luigi Garlascelli. He thinks he can stand up to a knockout punch of chi because it doesn't exist. In the other corner, it's 8th degree black belt Leon J., one of George Dillman's top associates and fellow practitioner of the no-touch knockout. This ought to be interesting.
In fact, when we did the test on Luigi, he was not ready to believe these things. Or maybe it was just staying there, seeing what would happen. It didn't work.
Dillman thinks he knows what went wrong and has come up with a very interesting explanation.
The skeptic was a totally non-believer. Plus, I don't know if I should say that on film, but if the guy had his tongue in the wrong position of the mouth, that can also nullify it. Yeah, you can nullify it. You can nullify a lot of things done to you. In fact, you can nullify them if you raise those two big toes. If I say I'm going to knock you out, and you raise one toe and push one toe down, I can't knock you out. And then if I go to try again, you reverse it. If you keep doing this, I won't knock you out.
明日飛んでます。早速。こんだけさ、精度がある。そう、そこがすごいんだ。これでね、今立てましたね。糸巻き。糸巻き攻撃。糸巻き。出ましたね。逆回転もあるんだ。なんかヨーヨーのチャンピオンみたいですけど。
There's the secret master over there with the no punch knockouts, and the other guy's an MMA fighter. It's a $5,000 bet. Without further ado, I'm going to, Matt Thornton, my good friend, Matt martial arts coach, is going to come up and is going to explain some of these phenomenon, and is going to talk about skepticism and the martial arts and how to differentiate reality from fantasy. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you for that very, very kind introduction that I'll have to live up to. Thank you guys for coming. I know it's Easter, we're all secular, but we have kids and grandkids and egg stuff we have to do, so appreciate it. Usually when I give these talks, if I'm not talking to a group of martial artists, I have to explain that outside of religion and probably alternative medicine, there's really no other, very few genres that have as much superstition as martial arts. And if you haven't been exposed to it, you wouldn't know that, which is why I always start usually with these videos, just to give you an idea. Most martial arts, in fact, any martial art, more or less, that's not a sport is bullshit. Just speaking plainly, because, and this is where the connection to critical thinking and science and reason, which are all subjects that I'm very interested in, this is where the connection is made. It's not the answer that's so important as it is the way you drew the conclusion. It's about the epistemology. So when you talk about most traditional martial arts, and I'm going to use that word broadly just for clarity right now, when you talk about those things, their training method usually revolves around one person pretending to attack you in a choreographed way and another person pretending to defend it in a choreographed way, and it's awesome for choreographed fights, so it's awesome for movies and things like that. But the other person is never actually fighting back. And almost any time you see a martial arts demonstration, you'll see somebody just kind of step forward and then leave their arm out in a way that no one has ever punched anybody ever in anger. But they'll leave it out there and then they do a million and one things. And it can look very impressive. And even very smart people, even people that might have backgrounds in boxing or functional combat sports, can be fooled by it. But what you have to pay attention to isn't what the person who is defending is doing, but what the attacker is doing. The attacker is in Japanese what we call an uki. It's 100% cooperation. And at some point what they'll tell you is, well, eventually we start resisting with each other. And then you find out that eventually never really happens, because if it did, then they would discover it didn't work. And or have to go back and reinvent the entire process, all the material to begin with. So that's pretty much what most traditional martial arts do. Combat sports are a meritocracy. Combat sports are an opponent process. There is an end goal, which is performance, and so the form follows the function and not the other way around. And so in boxing, no coach wants to train a boxer that can't box. No judo coach wants to train a judo player that's going to get tossed around. No wrestling coach wants to create a wrestling team that's going to have the worst season in history. There's motive for there to be resistance. And so combat sports are the place where functional martial arts survived. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was brought over very early from Japan before it had kind of morphed after the war into different things, when it was still very, very functional, and the distinction between judo and jiu-jitsu wasn't a big one. And they wrestled with each other. They actually fought. Somebody put you in a headlock, they're actually trying to hold you, and you actually have to get out. You actually have to take somebody down. It's not make-believe. And it made its way to Brazil into a culture where if two guys are fighting, three other people aren't going to come in and kick them in the head. There's a kind of a sense of machismo there, and fighting, sport fighting, in the sense of trying to it's hard to explain, but it was the perfect breeding ground for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because these guys will actually fight with each other. They'll go out to the beach and actually fight with each other, or go to the house and actually fight with each other, with more or less no rules other than, if you bite somebody's ear off or something like that, then they'll break it up. And they did that for decades. And it evolved and eventually moved its way to the United States when I came in contact with it. But back to the point, so trying to explain what art works and what doesn't, years ago I would get lots and lots of questions. Well, does this martial art work, or does this martial art work? And I'm trying to explain the process is that it's actually about the epistemology. It's about how you train. That matters, that you have to train against resisting opponents. And so I came up with one word meme for that, which I call aliveness. And aliveness is the antithesis of everything I'm talking about in traditional martial arts. So for something to be alive, it always has to have three things, which are essentially three different definitions of the same thing, which is timing, energy, and motion. So timing means it's not in a pattern. There's a sense of timing. So if somebody always throws a jab in a robotic pattern, you can always learn to defend it. But as soon as somebody throws a jab and is actually trying to hit you, and they're going to fake and move, and that's a totally different thing. So timing, for timing to be there, it can't be in a prearranged pattern. Motion, just lots of movement, not static with two people standing in stances. And energy, and when I say energy, I'm not talking about any woo-woo make-believe stuff. I just mean resistance. And that's aliveness. And all combat sports train with aliveness. Wrestlers train with aliveness. Boxers train with aliveness. Muay Thai boxers train with aliveness. French kickboxers train with aliveness. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu people train with aliveness. And that's the connection. It's what, for those of you who are familiar with the philosopher Daniel Dennett calls the opponent process. It's very similar, if you think about it, absent trying to hurt another human being, with a different goal in mind, to the scientific process. If you put forward a hypothesis, you're going to have to do it, for it to be credible, you're going to have to do it against peers that are worthy opponents, so to speak, people who are qualified to discuss what it is your hypothesis is about. You're going to have an experiment that's repeatable or testable, and it's a form of competition. They're in there to try and prove you wrong, and that's what it's all about. And people don't say, well, you shouldn't question that, because if you question that, you're insulting the individual scientist, or you're insulting the individual engineer. No, they understand that in the process of questioning that theory, the opponent process is how we as humans arrive at truth. So it's very much the same thing. And then over the years, I've run into pretty much every argument against it. As I've gone around the world, my job has given me the opportunity to travel literally all over the world, and I've run into lots and lots of things. And like Sam Harris has said before, at a meta level, there's really only ever three reasons people give for anything that's delusional. Arguments they'll try and make for it. The first one is that it's true. And the beautiful thing about what I do, that's a testable hypothesis. So if somebody says, Aikido works or this works, without hurting them really, especially with the art that I do, you can show them it doesn't. So that's nice. But the first one is it works. And once you get past it works, or while the person's kind of realizing maybe it doesn't in their argument, then they'll switch it to, well, it may not work, but it's good for you. And that's the second one. And I'm kind of skeptical about that as well for many different reasons, which I'll get into in a second. And then the third one is attack you, or attack the person that's making the argument, which isn't actually an argument, but that's where it goes. And it's the same thing with martial arts. So the first one is, well, what we do works. And again, that's a testable hypothesis. There's nothing that's too deadly that can't be, you can't put some equipment on and test it. And repeat it. Have students from all over the world repeat it and prove yes or no on a particular issue. And that's the beautiful part about what I do. It's true. I've always been of the opinion that if what you're doing isn't true, it's probably not good for you mentally or spiritually, to borrow a term that I mean metaphorically. And I think that's really the case with martial arts as well. So once you get past it's true, then you deal with, well, it's not true, but it's useful. And if you're getting somebody moving or you're getting them exercising and they understand it's just a cultural dance or something like that, of course, yes. But the moment it slips into delusion where people think they're learning something they're not, it's definitely not healthy for people. And you'll see that in a lot of the traditional martial arts. The guys that have been doing it for a very long time wind up in these positions in these authoritarian structures that are designed very much like religion. They have creation stories, they wear funny hats, they have special uniforms, they have a hierarchy and a pope, grand master, and they'll be there for a long time. And they go from being usually insecure, kind of scared guys to being insecure, scared guys that are dicks. Because now they have this facade that they have to defend, which is, it's an indefensible position. If an athlete like this guy that walked in and I always have mixed feelings about this. On one hand, I feel bad about the older guy there that got punched in the face. On the other hand, he's the one that asked for it. He put out a challenge to anybody in Japan and said, I'll fight you for $5,000. So he clearly believed his own delusion, which is kind of remarkable if you think about it. And then, was shown wrong. Somebody came in and proved him wrong. So I think I usually talk about these things for a few minutes and then I'll open it up to questions, because I usually get quite a few questions. But aliveness really is the thing I try and talk about, because that is the epistemology. I will in just a second. But that's the epistemology of functional martial arts. And the training method is what matters. And the consistent thing you see in all martial arts that work, which are combat sports, is a training method where you're working against resisting opponents. And so, like I said, you run into the same arguments. The first one is usually, well, what we do is too dangerous, or what you do is too dangerous. And I have actually, my bio's been updated since then, but I actually have 13 black belts. And one of them, she started training with me when she was, I think she was 51 or 52. And I think I asked her if she didn't mind I tell her age when I give these talks, and she said yes. So, but I think she's 67 or 68 now. So she was just at my gym here in Portland last weekend, and she was wrestling on the mat with people of all ages, male and female, and all sizes, and she's good. I mean, she will choke you. And she's 100 pounds, 67 years old. So it is the environment that we have, it is a perfect meritocracy. It's women, it's men, it's older, it's younger. So it isn't dangerous when it's done properly. So it's not that when I say resisting opponent, we all of a sudden throw you into the deep end of a pool and somebody's there trying to punch you in the face. It's, you're working your way up, just like you would with weights, progressive resistance, until it eventually builds up to whatever level you can manage in a healthy way without getting injured. But you can do that without hurting each other under proper guidance. And you can do judo, you can do what I do, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or mixed martial arts, even into the older ages, and still be perfectly healthy and make it a positive thing for your body. So that argument is not true, factually untrue. Then they'll say, well, what we do, maybe that's true, and you can do that, but what we do is just too dangerous. It's just too deadly. If we use this move, then people's heads will fly off or something like that. And that's also just nonsense. There is nothing like that exists in martial arts. There's no secret move. It's actually it depends, but it can be very hard to knock somebody unconscious, and people don't usually respond well to pain when you're in a violent conflict. That's one of the problems police officers run into when they haven't been trained properly in defensive tactics. They've been shown a move that hurts, and you're taking a situation where somebody's resisting and you're cranking on their wrist, and now they're pissed, but you don't have any control over their body, their whole body really. And it takes a bad situation, it can make it worse. Because pain is the least functional way to control another human body. What we do is we control a human body structurally through physics. Actually controlling that body without relying on you saying, ow. So there is nothing that is so deadly it can't be trained. whatever you're talking about, you know, I have people that all they do is train military people and contractors and things like that. These are people that are operating at the highest levels of threat. And of course, they're the ones that need aliveness the most. I mean, when we're talking about handgun retention, do you really want to practice handgun retention without ever having tried it against somebody who's never actually tried to get your gun back? No, you want to try it against a resisting opponent before you actually go out in the street and have someone try and take away your gun from you if you're a law enforcement or military. So they need aliveness even more. So that's not true. And then the last argument really I'll get is, well, you've missed the spiritual side of the martial arts. You've missed all that. You're only focused on function. And that's just not only is that not true, but it's actually backwards. Because the thing is, the process of having to step onto the mat and constantly see where you're at and not have any delusions that you're going to go out in a parking lot and fight 6 football players, but know what you can do and more importantly what you can't do. And have to, in my sport, when you lose, when somebody's put you in a hold that's going to either break an arm or choke you unconscious, you tap, you submit like you would in the UFC. I have tapped, there's no way I could tell you the exact number, but it's in the tens of thousands I have tapped over the last 20 years. And that's the only reason why I have the skill level I have, is that I was willing to put myself through that process. Pete tapped 10,000 times Friday. So, you know, but the reason why Pete's actually pretty good, to be honest with you. But the reason why he's pretty good is because he's willing to step on the mat and do that, and that takes a certain kind of character. And that type of character that it takes is built. You build that character through the process over and over again, and then all the positive benefits as far as becoming a better human being can manifest themselves through the activity. And if I change that activity up and I make it a delusion, all that gets lost. And then the last piece as far as that goes, I mean, the closest I think we as secular people would acknowledge that type of brain state is to be unattached to your own particular thoughts, particularly if you're neurotic or you know, you have issues when you come into rooms, anxiety, things like that, and usually for those kind of people, they're constantly focused on their internal dialogue, and it's distracting you from whatever's going on in the present moment. And the sport that I do actually forces you not to do that. I mean, I couldn't defend myself against Pete if I was thinking about an argument I had with a relative or something on the mat. It would be impossible. It demands focus from me during the activity. And that can also, over a long periods of time, extend itself into other aspects of your life where it's not that you stop thinking, it's just that you're no longer paying attention to what you're thinking about. So you can focus on the present moment. In Buddhist terms, it would be non-attachment to your internal dialogue. And mine's really boring, so I never pay any attention to it. So for me, that's about as spiritual as it's going to get. And that is, I've never seen an activity that forces that upon people, puts people in positions where you can practice that more than what I do. I'm biased, obviously. I'm sure you can do it in other sports, surfing and other things, demand that as well. But so again, when they talk about missing the spiritual aspects, they've got it backwards. And having said all that, I've never run across a good argument for not training realistically, and I couldn't bring myself, it's almost like a categorical imperative for me, it has been all my life, to ever teach anything that I thought was ridiculous. I just couldn't do it. Even for money, it would just, I might be an asshole in other areas of my life, but when it comes to that, I'm not going to do that. I just couldn't do it. I don't know how people do it. So that's kept me constantly searching for something functional in the arts. And yeah, I guess I'll open it up to questions and see.
If you'll wait for
Sure.
the mic so we can get this recorded.
Yeah, I did judo for about 10 years as a young adult and really enjoyed it. So I have some understanding of the martial arts, and I really admired the capoeira, the martial art / dance that came from the
African slave resistance to the colonial Portuguese in Brazil. Where does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fit into that?
That's a good question. I like capoeira as well as a dance. But standing on your hands is not the most functional way to fight, obviously. And you can go back during the 70s and 80s when the Brazilians first started doing their challenge matches. There were capoeira people that jumped in there and just got kicked in the face. And, as long as somebody is teaching capoeira without telling people it has anything to do with you being able to defend yourself against somebody with bad intentions, I don't have any problem with it. Culturally, I don't know exactly when it came in there. I'm skeptical of the creation story about slaves having to have their hands. It could be true, but I think it's more just dance that evolved. Every martial art has a story like that. So there's a martial art called Wing Chun that's also ridiculous, but its creation myth is the nun was blind and she was in a fire and she had to feel her way out, and so they developed this close contact thing. And then there's another one where a guy watched a praying mantis, and there's always these great stories. But then you think to yourself that it's not functional now. It would have if you chained my hand. If I stand on my hands right now and fight, you'd probably beat me up yourself. If you chain my hands and I stand on my hands and fight, you'll beat me up even worse. So it just never made sense. It just doesn't make any sense, right? But I do think it's beautiful.
And where does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fit?
Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu doesn't really have any relationship to that other than the fact that they're both from that same part of South America. Actually what happened with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it's kind of an interesting story, but there was Japanese were migrating to Brazil the end of the 19th century. And of course, at that time in Brazil was very much kind of mafia families ran everything. One of them being the Gracies. And so Gustavo Gracie, who was a Scotsman actually, who'd migrated to Brazil, who was big in the government, sorted out passports, and in return Maeda, who was one of Jigoro Kano's top students from the Kodokan, taught him judo/jiu-jitsu, because there was no distinction at the time between those things. And Kano was a true legend. I mean, he did aliveness and he put on challenge matches in Japan and all that at the turn of the century. And his black belts were renowned for everything the Brazilians can do now. And so he taught that to his son, the Scotsman's son, Carlos Gracie. And Carlos Gracie was an interesting guy. I'm on film, so I'm also going to have to think about how I phrase this. But my coach, who was one of the first 12 Americans to have contact and learn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the way he puts it is they're kind of like think of like a Mormon polygamy cult mixed in with some weird fighting culture, and you have the Gracie family. So he had his own weird diet, he had a compound, he had I don't know how many wives, I don't think all at the same time, but their whole thing was having children. I think he had 20 or 30 kids somewhere in there, and all of them did jiu-jitsu and all of them fought, and so you had a very weird, thing. But other than the fact that they're both from the same part of the world, I don't think there's any connection to those two arts.
Val?
I have the impression that many people pursue martial arts for self-confidence. Would you comment about that aspect of it?
Sure. I think that's absolutely true, yeah. I would say the majority. So we'll have people come in and say, my brother handles the people that come in now, but I did it for years. I did it all myself. So I had lots of contact with the public coming in, and a lot of people would initially come in and say they were interested in learning how to defend themselves. And the vast majority of those people, I would translate that, over time I learned to translate that as what they were saying was they wanted to learn to be more confident. Because most of them weren't under actual threat at that time. If they were, I would have told them to go get a dog or a gun. But, so yes, most do come into it for self-confidence. And the thing is, if you give me somebody who's a bit neurotic or a young teen kid that's getting picked on or something like that, and they get into the environment that I've created at my academy around a lot of healthy males and females where they are constantly having to test themselves to a limit that's healthy and know where they're at in that group, over time they do gain actual confidence. I mean, of course, because they're learning to do something for real. You can't fake skill in what I do any more than you'd be able to fake speaking Spanish or playing the guitar, because somebody will just come in and say, well, let's roll, meaning let's wrestle, and then the gig's up, right? It's like I say I speak Spanish, and then all of a sudden you start talking to me in Spanish. I'm like, whoa, sorry, can't actually speak Spanish. So the fact that it's empirical and it's real in the sense that being able to speak a language or play an instrument is real develops confidence in a way that a fake martial art could never do. So I think that's one of the best benefits for what we do.
So I believe that sports is a microcosm for society and can often lead society to a better place. And my question is, the guy in the video with the big knockouts, I mean, he probably goes to another trade show and does the same thing, and some people believe in him and most people don't. And so is that true about that guy? And what would be the societal equivalent? I mean, when will science and reason win out over mysticism? What would be the example of that?
I'm gonna stick with your first question because the second one I don't think I can answer. Not soon enough would be my only answer to it. But yeah, it's an interesting thing I think about all the time. I was actually thinking about this yesterday. So I watched some documentaries on. I watched a bunch of documentaries on Scientology and Mormonism, and that's more loony than this. You know, once you break it down and you think to yourself, you know, I won't get into politics. I probably would never have voted for Romney anyway. But the fact that he was a Mormon amazes me because he's clearly very bright, smart, good businessman, has a great family, he's made lots of money, he's a good executive. He has lots of, I think, very impressive qualities. And he believes that Joseph Smith stuck his head in a bag and read magic rocks and the Garden of Eden was in Missouri and he's going to become a god on a planet somewhere. I don't get it. So the interesting thing, Pete and I have talked about this, interesting thing about that video is what I'd be interested in, which I think is what you're getting at, is I'd like to see an interview with him after that, the Japanese guy, and see what he said at that point. I was at a talk in Los Angeles last year, and a young man was there that knew me from my work and came up and had a conversation with me, and he was in one of those groups for years. And this is a PhD, smart guy, secular guy now, bright young guy. But he was in that no touch where he would actually fall for 5 or 6 years. Like his sensei would make a magic hand motion and he would fall over. And so I was very fascinated by that. I kept asking him because I am as interested in that topic as anybody else is. And really what I think a huge part of it, I don't think this is the entire answer, but a huge part of it is community. So he was in a community where everybody validated that particular behavior. And to not validate that behavior between him and somebody that was put in a position of authority in front of this group, there's too many consequences for that as a social primate. And it really was only the senior students above him who kind of took him aside one day and said, you know, you're not really getting knocked over. And then that was the first moment it actually dawned on him. And again, this is a smart guy. So, you know, it's just, like Carl Sagan said, it's always the easiest person to fool is yourself, and so people get sucked into that. And Pete talks about this a lot, but for me, there's three areas that are necessary for somebody to have reason and critical thinking. The center area, the epistemology, is a technique. In my sport, it's a technique, it's aliveness. In what Pete does, he can teach. You can technically teach anyone how to use critical thinking. But it's sandwiched between attitude. First, you have to value truth in the fact sense of that word and be interested in finding out what it is. I mean, I can't make somebody value truth. If somebody's more interested in believing a delusion because they believe they derive some happiness from that, I can't make them value reality more. And so it's an attitudinal disposition. And then the end of it is after you go, let's say you do go through this epistemological process and you arrive at an unshakable conclusion about the nature of reality, do you change your belief? You know, which is a question in sense of integrity. And so between the technique of aliveness or critical thinking, the epistemology, which anyone can learn, is sandwiched between attitudes which I think are more values than anything else and can only be modeled. If that answers your question, but.
David?
Yeah, I have actually two questions. One, you can't go very far in a town without running into karate and taekwondo schools.
Tell me about it.
And there's always this outreach for children to come and take classes, and they stress the self-discipline, the confidence, but then also the self-defense. What I hear you saying is maybe not the self-defense, because that's kind of the loser the way they do that.
Mm-hmm.
The second question, my wife and I both took martial arts just for a couple of years, but we have at least a feeling for it. And I've always believed that someone who studied for a long time like you know, could walk into a bar and radiate a confidence simply by knowing yourself. And the customers would just feel that and not mess with you. And I just wondered, without you doing anything except just being normal.
Right.
Can you comment on both of those things?
Sure. So to the first one, you could say the same thing about Mormonism with kids. I mean, I grew up around a lot of Mormon kids, and they're great kids. They're smart, well behaved. In fact, I was saying this to my wife the other day. I admire most of those family values that they have, but at the same time, they're learning something that's a delusion. And so we wonder, can we give those kids all that without the delusion? And you know, in what I do, we can. We can give them all. They're going to get discipline, and they're going to get all the positive benefits they'd get from a make-believe martial art. But at the same time, if they get in a fight at school and some bully puts them in a headlock or sitting on their chest, they'll be able to defend themselves. And then the second thing I would just add in there, the evidence to, as it relates, and I love sports, and one of my black belts, Adam Singer, would love to have a conversation with you, because his whole mind is about the NFL and evolution and how it relates to culture. But the evidence to how badly head trauma affects humans and how easily the brain is damaged is overwhelming. So I think anything that involves kids hitting each other in the head is always bad. And the nice thing about what we do with jiu-jitsu is they're just wrestling. They're not actually striking each other in the face. To your second question, I like to think I radiate that confidence, but no. My buddy Paul Sharp taught a section at camp last weekend on self-defense, and the one thing that we always have to go back to when we talk to people about that is it really is just about defending your boundaries and understanding that niceness isn't goodness, and predators will prey on weak people. Lions who've procreated many generations didn't do it by picking out a bigger lion and going, I'm going to fuck with that guy. They find the weak one, the one that's vulnerable, the one that's not paying attention, is looking at its cell phone or whatever, and that's what they go after. So if you're alert and project a sense of purpose, then most of the time you can avoid most of these conflicts, assuming that you're not hanging out in dumb places, just through that alone. I mean, I've met women who've had lots of problems with people approaching them they didn't want to approach them, and I've met a few women who almost never have that problem. And it always, just as it is with men, it always comes down to how you present yourself in public. There was a video I was watching in Indiana a few months ago of some kids in Brazil that carjack. So there was a stoplight, and then run over, and they would take a gun over to the window and take the car. And they'd film these kids. It was undercover film. They'd film these kids for hours. And it's as usual with these type of things. There's 2 or 3 people, and you don't know that they know each other. And one of them's on the corner, and he's looking to spot cars, and he's watching. And the thing to remember is that there was 565 cars went by, and it was the 566th one that he picked. Why did he pick it? So that's what these guys were interested in. Why did he pick it? And this goes back to thin slicing and how fast we can make decisions and how accurate those decisions tend to be about people's character. But he knew which car to go after and which cars to avoid. And when they actually arrested him finally and had a conversation with him, he couldn't really articulate it, but he had a process, and all predators have that process. So you don't need to be able to fight to do that. You just have to have a sense of purpose and confidence about you. You have to look like you would put up a fight, and then they will leave you alone. Most of the time they will leave you alone. The thing to remember too is crime is rapidly declining. It has been. It's much safer now than it was when I was a kid in the 70s, and that's a long trend that's likely not to change. A lot of people don't realize that. And the odds of most of you being attacked by a violent criminal predator are very small, especially in the demographic of the room that I'm looking at. Most of you guys are not going to have that problem, and it's usually somebody you know. You know, most homicides are somebody you know. So I don't know if that answers your question, but.
You did.
Okay.
Right here.
Yes.
I've not been familiar with martial arts at all, and so I'm a bit confused. The difference. What is a martial art that doesn't teach self-defense? I thought they all did. Right.
They all say they do. The difference is in again what I was trying to explain during the talk, but it's in the way they train. So, Pete, can I borrow you for a sec? Just give you a physical example might be easier. He radiates confidence. So do that. Right. So this is probably the most common thing you'd see in martial arts. And then the other guy's going to do some kind of thing that looks super cool. And everybody's like, wow, I'm learning self-defense. But if I'm mad, I'm like, I want to punch Pete in the face. Is he really angered me? I'm not going to punch him like this. No. I'm going to grab him and I'm just going to punch him like, you know, like everybody else would that actually, you know, is trying to hurt somebody. And so for him to actually be able to defend himself, he has to practice against somebody who's doing what you would actually do. Not just closer, but with actually me trying to punch him in the face. You know, so the nice.
You do at your gym.
Well, we don't punch each other in the face like that. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that ultimately, the resistance has to be real. A better example would be, imagine I have Pete in a headlock, right? So I have Pete in a headlock, and there's lots of martial arts trainers, and he can do things, strikes and stuff, and I go, ow, and then he thinks he's learning self-defense. But there's no reason why we can safely actually really do this. We won't do it right now because we're both in suits, but I mean, at my gym, I would actually have him try and throw him and try and hold him. And he would do the same to me. And he may get out, thanks Pete, he might get out only 60% of the time in the beginning. And then over time, the headlock's actually quite easy to escape from. Over time, most Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu students, male or female, large or small, that have been doing it for more than a couple of years, it'd be very hard to hold them down by grabbing their head. They will escape. And they will have escaped because they've done it so many times against somebody who's actually trying to hold them. And that's the difference. So the thing about being a good coach, the art of it, is me being able to create an environment where people can do that without injuring each other. Because obviously it's counterproductive if you're injured. You're trying to defend yourself and then you get injured. It doesn't make any sense. But it can be done. That's the distinction.
So they don't resist in the other?
No.
You're taught not to resist.
It's choreographed. Yeah, it's make-believe. It's very much what you'd see in a fight, in a movie. They're not really fighting each other, but it looks like they're fighting each other. That's kind of the idea. Some of them will eventually have some form of sparring, but depending on the rules that they have for that particular part, it doesn't look anything like what they do. It just looks like two people trying to fight who don't know how to fight. Like if you gave me two traditional martial arts instructors and I put them in a cage to fight each other, it'll look like two guys who have no idea how to fight trying to fight each other. That's what it looks like. In the early days of MMA, they did that, and it was interesting, and it was also a bit of a spectacle, because nowadays it's just kind of cruel. If you were to take a traditional martial arts and put them in a cage with a trained MMA fighter, it just looks like somebody taking a beating. And so, make sense?
Right here.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. So, I wanted to ask, because earlier you were saying that criminality rates have gone down in recent years, and I just wanted to ask if you could explain that a little bit further, because I've always heard the exact opposite, especially from parents and elders saying, "Oh man, back in the 70s, when I was a kid, you could go outside and play and be safe, not have to worry about being kidnapped, and now we have to keep all our kids trapped inside and keep our eyes on them all the time." Because there's more criminals. So how does that work exactly?
Sure. There's a great book on the whole topic by Steven Pinker, who I'm sure many of you have read, called Better Angels of Our Nature. But he went into meticulous research and detail, and he traces it way back. So like I said, this isn't just a short timeline of the last few decades in this nation. but a worldwide trend. So there's this myth that ran through anthropology. I think mostly I blame most things on hippies, but I blame it on the hippies in the 60s. I apologize if some of you were hippies, but you guys messed a lot of stuff up. But in anthropology, they had this myth that back in the day when we were hunters and gatherers, we all lived peacefully at one with nature until, you know, agriculture and everything came in, and then it's actually the homicide rates when they go through there on those kind of tribal societies are what you would expect them to be if you gave it much thought and realized I have a group of people here, they have a group of people there. If I think I can kill them males, take their shit and their women, I'm going to go do it. And so are they. And the only thing that prevents us from doing it is force. And then you have governments coming in, and we give up that force to a Leviathan. We give it up to police departments and to the military and manage it. And then you have there's all kinds of other factors. But anybody that doesn't understand that distinction only needs to go to New York or look at the homicide rates. New York in the 70s, Times Square. New York now. I'm not saying Times Square is awesome because it's all Disney, but you know, New York is one of the safest large cities in the world. And it wasn't when I was a kid. And that's not just those few places. It's around the country, worldwide, especially in the industrialized first world nations. Crime has rapidly declined. And there's lots of reasons why people don't think that. I'll give you one example. Those of you that were kids in the 70s will remember the milk cartons with the kids, pictures of the kids' faces on them. But, you know, statistically, I'm a father of 2 young daughters right now, and my son, I mean, I have 4 kids, but obviously that's your worst nightmare as a parent. Nothing I can imagine being worse, so I can understand why parents would tell you that story, so you're not running off. But statistically, it's more likely that your child's heart's just going to explode than them getting picked up by a stranger who has bad intentions. It's just so extraordinarily rare. Swimming pools are a million times more dangerous than violent criminal actor intent on picking up your kid. I'm not saying let's let them run wild, but so why were all these kids on the milk cartons? And the reason was nobody made a distinction between kids whose step-parent took them or parent took them and they got a divorce. And 99% of the time, it's one of the other parents or relatives that kidnaps the child. But nobody said that on the milk cartons. So you had all these parents in the 70s looking at milk cartons thinking, Jesus Christ, I can't let my kid out into the yard at all. That's one of the reasons why I think it's very important that we are honest about statistics when it comes to things like that. Everybody that has a cause wants to play up the problem. Nobody really gets paid a lot of money to tell you things are getting better, but they are, especially with crime.
Roy? Well, I was thinking that you'd be faking Portuguese rather than Spanish.
Yeah.
I came from a long line of lucky cowards. And when I was a kid in Roseburg, I could outrun almost anybody. And if you did beat me up, my sister would come over and beat you up. So when I was in the Navy, about once a month, I had to be on shore patrol whether I wanted to or not. And I hated that because we had to go into bars and stop fights and things like that, and all we had was a nightstick. But I noticed that the ones who were mean or trying to cause trouble and so on they were opportunists. You know, they would use an ashtray, or they would catch you when you were unaware, or they'd talk you to go out of the bar, and as you're walking out, they'd get you from behind, that sort of thing. And to me, I don't see how you can realistically deal with that. I've been in a situation where I'm on a bus and somebody's getting really belligerent. You know, I have a sack of groceries. I have a couple of cans in the grocery. You know, I'm thinking, well, you know, I could club this guy, but you know, I don't want to kill him.
Right.
You know, and I'm not sure what to do. He's in his 20s, and I'm in my 70s.
Right. Well, no, you're.
Well, I'm saying that I don't see how you can make a realistic fight.
Right. Well, you don't. I don't make a realistic fight of a guy. Somebody comes up behind you with a hammer, hits you in the head, and then you defend yourself. How to defend against somebody hitting you with a hammer from behind is not part of the curriculum. So the main way you defend yourself. What I do is the best possible way to fight another human being, period. It's provable, it's testable physically. But if you come up behind me and hit me in the head with a pipe, that's not going to help. So, and like I said, if you're dealing with a situation where it's predators involved, there's usually going to be more than one, and they're not going to come after you unless they think they can beat you. These guys aren't athletes. You know, these guys they're weak, and they go after people who are weaker or perceived as weaker, usually. And so the most important thing you can do is pay attention to your surroundings and know what's going on and be aware of what's going on. Be aware of what is at your 6. And does he have a buddy? And is there bad intentions going on? And being able to read situations like that, far more important than anything I can tell you. Having said all that, if all of that was missed and you find yourself rolling around on the ground with somebody with bad intentions, then that's where the physical part of what I would teach you would come in. But by that time you've missed so many steps. And you know, most people a lot of people who are victims of violent crime will usually say in the beginning, yeah, it's just all of a sudden, I didn't, you know, all of a sudden this person hit me from the side or they hit me from behind, a very common story. But if you interview them long enough and in the right way and ask the right questions, you'll discover that they had a sense almost every single time that something bad was going on. And they allowed themselves to override their gut instinct that there was a dangerous situation, our millions of years of primal evolutionary instinct, because they want to be a good person, or they don't want to be rude, or they don't want to tell this person no, or they don't want to get up and be embarrassed, or they don't want to leave a scene, or whatever it is, until it's too late. And Gavin DeBecker is a good writer on this particular topic, talks about this a lot. That's actually the thesis of his work, but it's very true. So in most of these situations, the vast majority of these situations, you will know ahead of time, just like you knew when you're on the bus or whatever. And if you pay attention and leave the scene, then that's what you should do.
Maddie, I'd like to know your height, and I'd like to know how it applies to this activity.
Sure. I am 6'8". Everybody is different. So as you are wrestling with different bodies of different sizes, you learn how to make your body work the best. So it gives me advantages for sure. Sometimes there's disadvantages in particular situations on the ground where I'm trying to defend a limb or something like that. So all body styles have better strategies, and you learn how to take advantage of your own particular strengths and weaknesses over time through resisting opponents.
You, to some extent, addressed my questions as I raised my hand, but still, you know, you say that the martial arts are a choreographed game following a protocol, I guess, and then you say the way you do it prevents people from getting hurt. That must follow some sort of protocol too. How is it different?
Sure, that's a good question. The simple way I explain it is what I call the I method. 3 stages. I'll be quick because I only have a couple minutes. But introduce, isolate, integrate. So imagine a headlock. You're on the ground and somebody comes up and grabs you in the head, like you'd see in any schoolyard fight. Right? I introduce you to what to do with your body, and you practice it without any resistance for 5 or 10 minutes against somebody who's holding you there just so you can learn the mechanics. As I see that you have the mechanics correctly, then I will move to the second stage, the drilling stage. For us, drilling always involves resistance, and I'll tell the person that's holding you to actually try and hold you, not squeeze your head off, but hold you so you may or may not get out. And then over time, it'll get to the point where you're comfortable with it, they're comfortable with it, you've been doing it more, then there's no me having to tell them or not tell them. They're actually trying to hold you and you're actually trying to escape. And that's how we work it. And everybody's different. So if somebody comes in, it depends on their athletic ability and how their body is at the time. That process might take much longer for somebody who comes to me and is out of shape or has an injury than a younger athletic person, but it's the same process. So it's progressive resistance, but there's still somebody resisting. And it's not in a pattern. They're just actually holding you, and you just, on the mat, I say, hold Bob down in a headlock. And sometimes you can't get out, and you panic, and you feel like you can't breathe, and you're gonna tap on your partner and say, I need to stop. And then if you go home that day and you decide, I'm not gonna come in and face that again, then you won't get good. But if you come back the next day and grab that same guy and go through that process again until you learn to overcome that panic and eventually escape, you get good. And that's the process.
Are there mistakes? Do people get hurt?
People get hurt in any sport, but I would say that this is safer than pickup basketball. All right, well, thank you very much.